Welcome everyone. I'm Tara with EduFlow Academy. We're sharing some webinars that are resources for you to take with you and to grab some learning nuggets from. And today we're going to be learning from Hadiya. I said it correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you. I was checking before to make sure. And so I'll be in the background in the chat. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat while we run this session today. And we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some question and answer. And so if you're ready, I will mute and turn it on over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're here to talk with me today about quality assurance. Now, I am typically talking about storytelling. I wrote a book called Story Training. It's a topic that I've talked about a lot. And then a few years ago, I just became enamored with the idea of considering how we do quality assurance. And it's mostly because I hate it. I do not want to look at classes over and over again. I made it, I'm done, I want a divorce, I can't. But you get sort of stuck in this perpetual loop of the zombie course that keeps coming back to life that you just can't. And you begin to feel very insecure. Is it me? Am I the problem? Like, what is going on here? And when I first started this journey was several years ago into exploring this. And my thinking on it was the same as a lot of people's thinking in this field was that, this is about checklist, right? It's about getting to the end of a course and what's the perfect checklist that you can go through and check everything off and make sure it's perfect, right? But what I've noticed in that time period is online, you can Google right now, e-learning checklist. Why are there so many? There's so many because you abandon that checklist eventually. Sometimes you update it, sometimes you have one you tweak. It's a process. It's got to be built into it and baked into it. So I thought there's got to be more to this. And so I decided to branch out a little bit further and think, what is the actual field of quality? There's a whole field. There's a quality assurance. You get a whole master's. There's whole companies dedicated to quality assurance. And if you're developing e-learning, no, of course, don't go to any programmer parties. They don't consider you to be a programmer. That's okay. However, we make a lot of the same decisions and we have the same trials and tribulations as a programmer does, right? No, you may not have written a novel, but you've written enough workbooks in order to satisfy any Barnes and Nobles. And they have editors who are dedicated to them. Stephen King doesn't just print off a book and take it to Barnes and Noble. It doesn't work that way. There's a whole industry of people between him and the bookstore. There's a whole industry of people between the software developers and your computer. And all we have is 3 in the morning looking at a course over and over and over again. And other people trying to look at it too to see whether or not this course is perfect. I thought there's got to be more to this. And so as I delve deeper into the world of quality, I realized that checklists are not even in the picture. That's, how we talk about a difference between I'm a instructional designer and e-learning developer. And every time I teach Storyline, I'm like, Storyline, this is step 625. The other steps that happen, 1 through 624, there's a whole lot of thinking and a whole lot of writing and a whole lot of trying to figure out and a whole lot of discussions. Quality is the same way. That checklist is step 635. Steps we haven't even touched, steps 1 through 634, right? And so what we're talking about today is steps 1 through 634. We're talking about those steps. We're talking about how we can actually make this something that's baked into what we do in a more formalized way. So that's what this is about, right? All right, so I'll go ahead and share my screen and we are going to get started. Share. Okie dokie, let's see, I'm gonna make sure I can have my chat window up so I can see. All right, so one change that I made is right off in the title. Developing quality management processes for e-learning products. What used to be there was assurance, but now I know that that's not exactly accurate, because quality assurance is just one of many, many, many quality processes that fall under quality management, right? Quality assurance is just one piece of it, right? So if there's anything I've learned to change my vocabulary around it, we're talking about quality management, which is a whole suite of processes that fall under that. And most of them need to be included for this process to work. Okay, so my name is Hadiya Nuriddin, and I am in Chicago, as you can see by our little, it's called Sears Tower. You know, they try to tell us it's called Willis Tower, but we ignore all of that. And we will continue, whatever it was when you moved here is what it's going to be called for the rest of eternity. So I'm a learning strategist, independent, instructional designer, e-learning developer, I'm a speaker. I speak at several conferences, and I'm an author, as I mentioned, of the book Story Training. All right. So my goal for you is modest for this. It's very modest. It's encourage you to reflect on and then audit your existing quality management process and consider a path forward. As I'll say later and reiterate over and over again, you already have a quality management system of processes. You already do, because if you didn't, you know, your classes would be complete trash. And one of two things would have happened by now. You would have either been fired or promoted into management. I'm kidding. But absolutely, you have a system already. We all do. The question is whether or not it is formalized, whether or not it is scalable, considering the types of courses you have, the number of people in your group. Is it really a process? Is it really a system? Or is it just some steps that you walk through when you have time, when you need to? And the way you're doing it is inconsistent every time. And of course, if you engage in inconsistent process, you're going to get inconsistent results from that process. So all I want you to do after all of this is really sort of reflect on what are we doing here, whether or not you work as one person, you know, or you have a team of people. What are we trying to accomplish, and is it working? And if everything changed tomorrow, would it still work? Right? Okay, so these were the options. So go ahead in the chat and let me know which one of these options you've selected here. Just go ahead and type it. These are the options. This is a poll that I took on LinkedIn. You sound like 139 or so votes. And you can see what came out, right? So peer review was the winner. And that's typical, right? So I see a lot of peer review coming in. That's typically what I see. So that did not shock me in the least. What did shock me, and what will forever shock me, is what came in second, which is that there are internal teams that are dedicated to quality management within an organization and dedicated to training. They're not offshoots of someone else who's just helping us out. You know, no, they are dedicated to it. So it's interesting to me that that exists, and I think it's a wonderful thing. But I do know that I have been told that before. And then when I took a closer look, I found that they didn't really have a systematic process either. Good example would be I'm working with a client who says that they have standards, right, already set up. So I talked to this measurement team, like, of course we have standards. So I said, okay, well, let me see what they are. And so they send me the standards, and they are only for the quizzes. They're only for how you write questions. They're only for how you manage the results, whether it's level 2 or level 1. That's it. That's all they are. I'm like, well, what about the classes? Do you look at the classes themselves? Oh, no, we don't look at the classes. Okay, well, that's a start, you know, the fact that you have those standards for how a question should be written, but that doesn't take into account all the other aspects of what goes into the course, like the learning experience or anything for that matter. So even though this the second winner there is an internal team, how I'm defining an internal team is a little bit different. I thought that people being the only person would win. I thought that would be the winner for that. So I'm glad to see that more people have support. I also would say that when I hear peer review, it a lot of times, and that may not be true for some of you, but many times it's just here. Can you look at this for me, please? It's not a formalized process where there's time allocated, because I have classes too that I'm developing. So how does anything happen to my workload as I take the time out to engage in peer review? It waits for me, right? So am I going to devote a lot of careful, loving time to your course? Sometimes not. So it's a tough position that we're putting people in. There's also reviewing. There's a difference between taking a course and reviewing a course. I find that sometimes if we have people review a course, they're taking it, which means that they're taking the path of least resistance. Testing is a whole nother discipline in itself of actually trying to break the course. So how we're even defining what these things mean come with many caveats and many ways around it. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's no underlying process. All of these review options are tools. And as we know with any tool, example like an LMS, the tool exists to support a process. If there is no process to support, then the tool eventually wears out its welcome. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work over time, right? So you definitely need a process first, and then select which one of these is going to be used to help us live through that process and make that process come to life. Okay. So let's talk about what all that means. So tell me in the chat, whose responsibility is quality management? Whose responsibility is it? What do you think? Not seeing anything in the chat. Whose responsibility is it? Person who creates it. Let's see. Developer's responsibility, management responsibility. Well, I got a surprise for you. Everybody is responsible for quality. Everybody, everyone involved in this project is responsible for it. So this pressure that we, as the developers and designers, are supposed to just be able to nitpick every single, it is very difficult to review your own work. And one reason why it's difficult is because when someone brand new looks at it, someone disassociated from it, they're checking for understanding, right? So they're trying to put the pieces together. They're like, okay, this is missing here. This doesn't make sense. But you are no longer checking for understanding because you wrote it, because you put it together. So what you're doing is filling in blanks that are in your head, but aren't on paper. So people trying to make sense of it, they're more likely to find a lot of the errors that you can't find. Now, some of you are blessed. Some of you are just blessed. You can touch a pile of papers and be like, there's a missing comma. There's a missing comma on page 5. Like, how do you do that? Like, I can't do it right in front of me. I always say the best way to find an error in a workbook is to print 100 copies. And then you'll see it on page 1. You spelled your name wrong, right? I mean, it's wild, but that is just the way the mind works, right? That is how it works. So, but relying on that one person, is not a process. It's not a process. Neither is relying on the receptionist, relying on your spouse, relying on whoever. That's not a sustainable process. It'll get you through, a dark night, but it's not sustainable by any stretch of the imagination. But it's everybody's responsibility. Everybody needs to get on board. So in order to get to that quality, in order to get to what we want, or what we define as quality, and we'll talk about that as well, is we take this path to quality. And there are 5 steps in it. First is commit. That's number 1. I can't tell you, in my many years, I've been in training development for about 20 years, 10 years internal, 10 years out. And I can tell you there's so many initiatives that we started that we had the best intentions of doing, but we never really committed to it because we never took the time to say, what would have to happen in order for it to work for us? What would have to happen in order for us to commit to it? So that's what that stage is all about. Create is, of course, about creating a process and testing it and all of that to make sure it is sustainable, because it has to be flexible. It has to work for us. I wish I could give you a cookie cutter way of implementing quality management at your organization and say, here, bloop, bloop, bloop. No. I have learned through the years of working on this is that someone in your organization has to build it internally. You have to do the work because only you know what the problem is and you need to find the answer to it. Like that is how that works. There is no one way of doing it. Now you can take a model and modify it all day, but the real learning behind quality is for you to do the investigative work and say, what are we solving for? Because you don't want to create a solution looking for a problem, which is a common thing, right? Maybe you don't have a problem. Maybe it's not affecting the organization. You have to do the work to do that. And that's what this is about. So then it's execute it, live with it for a little while, and then integrate it into your full processes. And then once a year, review it to see if it works. This can't be a matter of if. It's got to be a matter that we review it, because quality checking happens. Whether or not you're engaged, it happens. And who ends up doing it if no one's paying attention? The learner. The learner does it. The learner is the one who runs into the problems. The learner runs into the errors. They're quality checking your work and you're just not involved in it, right? So it's going to happen. The question is, how are you going to take the reins and take control of it, right? So what we're going to focus on is this last step, this second step rather, which is create. That's what this is all about. Okay. So again, I want to stress that you already have a process. You already have a process under your belt, but there are some benefits to it being formalized. And formalized, obviously, is a term that can be used to define anything. But the way I define formalized process, it should have the following characteristics. It should be governed by a mission or a goal, right? And we're going to talk about what that means. But there should be something behind it. There's got to be something that's driving it. Like, why are we engaged in that? Because when times get tough, when you're trying to build out this process, you need something to stand by. You need something to withhold it. This is why we're doing this. This is why our goal, because it can be painful to integrate a new process into your workflow that you don't necessarily have time to do your original work, let alone this. So having that mission to cling on to is important. It should include standards to measure against. Obviously, there's standards around it should be grammatically correct. I mean, obviously, but even that has its caveats. Let me know in the chat, yes or no. Do you support the usage of the Oxford comma? That's the serial comma in a series, the last comma in a series. Tell me yes if you support it, and no if you do not use the Oxford comma. Yes or no? Yes, yes, yes. Supporters, supporters, supporters. Yes, 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 yes. Grammarly, make sure you can change that. Yes, yes, yes. So most of you say yes. I usually get a mix, 50-50 mix. Some of you can sense that this is a trap, so you're not answering. That in itself, that's just regular old grammar. We haven't even decided whether or not we're going to do that right now. There are, of course, you're following a standard of style. If you're finding, somewhere, that is the standard, right? However, again, so it's not just clear cut either to say that everything should be grammatically correct. You need to have some kind of standard in place to measure against. It should be documented, should be written down. with policies and procedures and terms, right? For those of you who are in e-learning, how do you name your versions? Do you say alpha, beta, gold? Do you say version 1, version 2? How do you do it? Do you just put a date in the name of the file? How do you do it, right? How do you do that? Beta version, beta, alpha, beta, gold, version numbers, and dates. That's a lot. That's a lot, right? So what does it mean? What does it mean to go from alpha to beta? We have some, I have my own definitions. One's with the voice, one's not with all of that stuff, but that's not universal. That's not universal what defines that. So you coming out with different terms, let alone us as an industry using different terms for different things. Sometimes within my own process, within one person's process, can use different terms for different things, right? So that is something that needs to be documented, definitely, right? And so, yeah, I see version 1, version 2. So then there becomes the question of what turns a version 1 to a version 2. Some people are like version 1, 1.5, 1.7. I've never seen 1.75, but what is the rationale by saying that this is a new version? Is it because I'm worried that a version is going to get corrupt, so I just called it version 2? Is it because my client sent it back? Like, what are those processes behind that, right? Now, you don't have to document all this. I don't want to scare you, but it is worth thinking about. It is worth thinking about, and then you deciding whether or not you want to make it a standard. We bring it up, we talk about it and say, that's too much. It's too much. But at least we know that there is an issue with version control, right? And then, is it scalable and flexible, right? I say things exception themselves out of existence all the time. So that means that people always come up with a reason of why they can't follow the policy, right? I can't because of this. This is a rush job. I can't, right? So if it's flexible enough, you can say, well, then use this version, or give a methodology for scaling back on the version that they can use. But again, quality checking is going to happen anyway. And then after all that, you have the tools and the templates that support the process that you've created. So this is getting closer to what I would consider a formalized process, not just one that we just do over and over again, and it could change based on who's in charge and who's around and who's participating, or what tool we're using, or what kind of class we're designing. This would be the same no matter what we do. Okay. So in the chat, tell me, what do you think some of the benefits are of formalizing your process? Why would you want to? Everything's fine as it is. Why are you asking us to start doing that type of stuff? Yeah, let's rework. There's that saying, stitch in time saves 9. I use that. It's so true. So true. Efficiency, visibility, viability. Yeah, if the staff changes, how can we work around that? How can we make changes? And I would also say that it also gives L&D a little bit of credibility. We all know, it's no secret that a lot of the organizations we work with feel like what we're doing is basically witchcraft made up, and that, we're just like, yes, no, maybe, give me the PowerPoint, blah, 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 make it pretty, make it shine. That's what we do. We know that this is true, and we don't do ourselves any favors by not having things documented and streamlined and telling them, this is how our quality management goes. If you are late for a review, all of these things collapse under it. You don't have to be that violent about it, but to let people know this is a real thing. This is a real process. It's sturdy, it works. It's just like your process. It's just as vital as your processes. And we are going to protect that process, as much as we can. This is how we function, because I need Sandra to be able to move on to other classes, right? This is important. This matters, right? So making them understand that this is a real thing that we are engaging in, and this is important, that goes a long way. And formalizing it definitely helps that process of saying, being able to communicate, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. So before we get into the heart of this here, I want to talk about the fact that when we say review, we tend to lump three, there's actually probably more, but three types of reviews together, right? That really don't have any relationship to one another. One is content. Is it right? Now, we know that typically we get that from subject matter experts or stakeholders. We don't make those decisions ourselves unless we are one of them, right? Even that process gets really tricky, in that you get 25 versions of something and they expect you to reconcile it. And even it takes days for you to even get to the point where you realize you can't reconcile it, right? That's a whole process that needs to be looked at and streamlined as much as possible of how you're intaking content. Then technical. For e-learning, I lump, for lack of a better category, I lump technical with being able to navigate a course, with also grammar errors and things of that sort. Anything that gets in the way of me taking this course and completing it successfully, which could be a litany of errors or error messages or what have you that's coming up, or just stopping and not being able to have broken links where I can't completely navigate the course, right? That's technical. That can definitely be documented. It's difficult to do. I would say that with software, one of the big differences is that if you click the save button, 9 times out of 10, it probably works the same in every computer and every program. But when we click a button, we make a button, it could do anything. It could do anything. It's unpredictable for me to say whether or not this button works. There's also some interface design issues that all of us don't have the same training on interface design. So people will make boxes and then use that same box for a button later. Okay, well then the learner is like clicking on the box or don't know that they can click on that, how to make things look clickable. I mean, that's all a whole field of study that many of us have not branched out into. Right. So that can be kind of nuanced, but I would say that one of the trickiest ones of all is this last review. And that's the one we're going to talk about, which is design. Not does it teach, but how does it teach? Right. So that's the one that we're going to talk about, is this design. How do you review for something as nebulous of whether or not this class is effective? Of course, you start with effective. What does that even mean, right? Yeah. So tell me something. How do you know a class is effective before the pilot? Before the pilot, that's what people say. Well, you can pilot it. No, I want to know before it hits their hands. And you can just say a word or two. You don't have to tell me all of it. Just, how do you know? How do you know? If you were to look at someone else's class and say, this is going to be effective, using learning science to guide design. And so you would be able to see that, right? You would need to see evidence of that. That's the challenge. And then which components of learning science, right? So that's where it gets a little tricky, but we'll explore that. A focus group, right. Testing a sample, okay. What other ways can you tell? Yeah. Michaela knows this is a trick. We don't always know whether or not the class is going to be effective. Yeah, that's hard, right? Not sure you can know. Not sure you can know for sure. But we release them anyway. We don't say, how do we know this car is going to drive? We don't know. Take it to the dealership. Let them figure it out. See what happens, right? And so that's how close can we get to it? So I don't think we can. You can't be like, these people are gonna. but you can get closer. You get a lot closer than you probably already are to something like that. And so we'll talk about how. All right. So within that blue box there, that I had, blue circle rather, that I had for create, lives all of these different processes. Quality, quality planning, quality assurance, quality control, and quality inspection. So first I'm going to go through the high level, what they mean, and then I'm going to walk you through an example. And this is going to be about design. All right. So I thought that we were the only industry where words could mean different things, but no, apparently a lot of industries have a similar situation. And the quality industry is no exception to that. So I have looked in many directions to find some of these definitions, and I picked the ones that I think would be more applicable to us because they're different in different spaces. You wouldn't think they would be, because quality is a science. You would think that they would all be the same, but not necessarily, right? Okay, so first, quality. So quality is the degree to which an object or entity satisfies a specified set of standards. What that is saying is that it's difficult to measure quality if you don't have standards to measure them against. So you need some standards. You need to acknowledge that standards is necessary, right? Next, quality planning. So quality planning is the next stage. And again, I'm going to give you examples of this. And I also have, I'm going to point you to a place where you can download a sheet that has these definitions on them, so you don't have to previously write them down. Quality planning. Quality planning is identifying and documenting the standards. So it's one thing to have a pie in the sky standard. We want all our courses to be effective. Okay, that's wonderful. But what are the standards of effectiveness? What are the standards? So this, in the quality planning phase, this is where you decide, yes, these are going to be our standards. And again, I'm going to show you an example. Then you have quality assurance. So think of the word assure. I'm going to assure quality. We decided this is our mission. We have standards that are going to support that mission. And now, how do we assure that this happens? How do we assure? And we do that through policies and procedures that are created for that purpose, That is quality assurance. So that's your sort of documented policy there. So this is what we're going to do to make these classes work. This next one is the nebulous one that I've heard many definitions over, for quality control. I've always thought that quality control was at the end, where you go through and check, what could be wrong with the issue. But then I started thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't quite make sense, because it's difficult to control quality on something that's been created already. Now, again, if I use the example of a car, they don't put a car together using some standards, tow it to the dealership, hand the keys to the dealer and say, see if it works. They don't do that. Right? They have measures along the way to make sure those standards are met. At every step in the way, they have some control in place to make sure we can uphold the standards that are listed, that are documented under quality assurance. So quality control, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, is you. Is you. You are quality control. It's not some separate process. You are quality control. What we are used to when we think of quality control is this final term, which is quality inspection or quality check. This is when you go back and check whether or not the standards were met. So you can see how it just flows. It flows. It all starts with, what are we trying to do? What is our mission? What is our purpose? And then all along the way, we support that purpose with different mechanisms and different processes, and we support it until we get to the end where we say, did we actually fulfill our mission? All right, so let me ask you, speaking of that end, let me know, yes or no, do you have quality checklist? I don't care if it's just you, if it's your department. Some of us, we've been doing it for a long time, so it's in our heads. one. I understand that you may not want to admit whether or not you have one or not. Modify from quality matters. Yeah, that's a good resource. I've had several. But again, I started from the end, from this complete course. But if I go, just like you go forward through a process, it's difficult to go backwards. What standards am I upholding other than grammar? What standards? So I make a checklist to support what, right? Something to think about. All right, so here's an example. Close this chat. Okay. So first we need to start with quality. What is our mission going to be? So the input to this process is going to be, we're going to brainstorm. You can do it in other ways, but we're going to brainstorm what defines how our team meets expectations, right? So that's just is one way of doing it, because quality is usually defined as meeting customer expectations. That's usually how they define it at the end of the day, that end user. How do we satisfy that person? So how do we meet expectations? You have to decide whose expectations you're trying to define, but that's just an abbreviated way of saying that. What comes out of that process, the output, is a guiding mission, right? Other things come out of that process, but that's one. So here's an example mission. Our goal is to create authentic learning experiences that closely mirror the challenges learners face on the job. Some of you are thinking, wow, that's deep and profound. Yes, I feel seen and whole. Some of you are like, that's our job. Like, that's the bare minimum. That is a job description. That is not a mission. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm so embarrassed for her, right? And that's one of my points. My point is that anybody can say this. Anybody can say this. You can say this all day long. You can shout it from the mountaintops. You can say, yes, this is what we're all about. But this is hard. This is not a suggestion. When you make it a mission, it's not a suggestion. It's not an option. It is the standard. It is what you are trying to achieve every time. It's difficult to do that without changing and modifying somehow the way you work every single time. And I know a lot of people will, present to me classes with all these rich learning experiences. I'm like, okay, that's one class. What about, you ask them about the other 7 classes they made that year and they lawyer up, right? We don't talk about those classes. We talk about, let's look at this course. Let's just look at this one, right? Because it's difficult to sustain that level of authenticity, right? One of the obstacles in a way is spelled SME. And stakeholder and all those people involved, they have a say in it too. And sometimes it's difficult to get that information out of them, right? But out of quality comes this mission statement, right? So that becomes the input of your quality planning, right? Here it is right here. Our goal is to create that authentic learning experience, right? So the output needs to come in this quality planning bit of, what does that look like? What does it look like to be an authentic learning experience, right? So here's an example. So I've decided, it's just one of the standards, that all instructional designs must be problem-based. We decided as a team, this is not just me in a room, me and the organization. I talked to leadership, anyone who would talk to me about it, and I said, what does it look like? Well, I wanted to reflect the problems that they have on the job. Okay, so we have decided that all instructional designs must be problem-based. There'd be a lot more to it if this was an actual standard, but you get the idea. That's what we're looking for. So that means a lot. That means that at the instructional design phase, we have to see some of that action going on. We need to see that it's problem-based. We need to know that from the design document, right? So it happens early in the process, right? This is what we've decided as a group should happen. So now this standard upholds our mission. The standard supports the mission. Now we need to find a way to support this standard, right? So the output is a list of standards intended to support the mission. So the input, of course, as we have here, is that our instructional design should be problem-based. The output has to be a list of policies and procedures intended to support those standards, right? We need to support the standards now, right? One way of doing that is to say, this is our policy. Me as this is training manager, leader of instructional design of all things. I'm going to say that in your initial discussions with clients, they must be centered on the problems we need to solve early on. I don't want to, not later, that needs to be in the first discussion. Now, again, this is an example of what I may say is the policy, right? This policy supports the standard, right? It supports that standard, that we need to have them talking. Our whole discussion has to be framed around solving these problems. That's why we're doing this. What's the problem? And then give me the content. Give us the content to support solving that problem. That's the approach that we are going to take, right? That's our policy, right? So again, the input was our standard and the output is the policies and procedures intended to support the standards. So this output becomes the input for the next stage. Again, those initial discussions with clients must be centered on the problems they need to solve. And then the output becomes a list of strategies and actions for supporting the policy and procedures, right? This is quality control. Quality control is how do I support those policies and procedures, right? I need to control it as it comes through production. So this is a document that I made early on when I went freelancing, and I literally just put it up there because I wanted to fill up my website with tools. So this is what I picked to do it. I call it the 5 Ps, blah, blah. I never really looked at it again. And then I had a client who had looked me up, really excited to get started. She goes, I downloaded your 5P documents. I'm ready for the kickoff meeting. I have all these questions answered. And I was like, what? Let me go look it up. Let me go look it up again. And it was this document, right? And as I was going through this, I was like, what about that document? Oh, look, it starts with problem. This is great. What a great coincidence here, right? So this would be part of this. This would be part of your quality control, that you would say, everyone, as you go kick off and talk to your clients, the first thing you need to do is talk about problem. So this tool is a quality control tool. That's what this template is, right? So people go through from the very beginning, very first question, and then everything that rains down from that is in support of fixing that problem. This is quality control, right? All right, so now you have those tools, you have everything in place, you have the output, which is the strategy supporting the policies and procedures, and then finally you have quality inspection. So how do we support that quality control? How do we make sure that it's done, that we met those standards, right? So the output would be a list of strategies and actions for checking whether standards were met. So this would be an example checklist to support that, right? And so this is a draft of what I'm working on for a client right now, but we have the standard here. This is the standard. The course uses a problem-based approach to learning. This is the definition. And then these are examples of what that looks like. And the rating here is about, and we're sort of drafting whether or not this makes sense for them, but the rating is going to be indicative of whether or not you need a rubric, whether or not this met the standard and how closely it came to meeting the standard, right? If it's anything before under 3, indicate why, right? So this is supposed to be made so that someone who is not, that peer review that you're just like, here, look at this. Now that peer reviewer can actually walk through it and say, do I see evidence of this? Maybe I see some, and then indicate why. You can even have it where the designer writes the evidence of what evidence it is, and then you could have confirmed that, right? But you're looking for evidence of whether or not it supports it. It supports that mission, right? And so that's what this is. It's just a stream. It's just a stream of support that walks you through, step by step of how you're going to manage quality, and it all trickles all the way back up to that quality standard that you set long ago, and everything that falls under it are tools intended to support it and make sure you meet it. Okay. So some tips here gonna quickly go over some tips for each step of the way. It's obviously complicated to go through these, and you may want to take it piece by piece. But let's start with the mission statement, which is just one part of the quality discussion. It needs to be shaped by a mindset, right? It's, what do you think about quality? I have a master's degree, I have certifications, I have and it took me a while to just accept the fact that what I have in my head are a bunch of shards of theories, just shards of theories that I've never did or never said, okay, how do these all come together into what I think a class should look like? What is it, and it's mostly because it can't necessarily, because we all do it differently. And if I go from project to project or job to job, no one has a standard way of doing it. But you need to decide, you all need to put your shards together into one cohesive message to say, this is who we are. This mission represents who we are as a training team. It should be observable, that you can see what it looks like, right? So when you start talking about learning sciences or what have you, what does that really look like at the end of the day? Because I can't follow a standard if I can't see it. Balance between broad and specific. I had a client who's like, should we put one of the standards that they should follow Bloom's taxonomy? And this, I don't know. I think that's a little too specific. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but that may be a little too specific for what you're trying to accomplish in all of this. And I think that I found out later she was trying to do something else, which we'll talk about later. For planning, standards are a tough one because, first of all, they're hard to write, but they also should be made in partnership with the business. This isn't about us just deciding based on our education and books and blogs and podcasts of what learning should look like. We really should be talking to the business to find out what's going to best help them. Now, at the end of the day, we decide, because we are the experts, but it's not just about us deciding what's good for them. It's a collaboration. Make sure it's defensible, research-based, in other words. When I was, I haven't seen this lately, but when rapid e-learning first came out, a lot of companies had policies around, there needs to be an interaction every third slide. Okay. And I know what they were trying to do, because people were just creating page turners and they were trying to force people to create an interaction. But that's not necessarily research-based or defensible in any way. Now, if you can find the research that says it should be this, every 10 minutes or something, then that's great. But what you should come up with are really research-based standards. And it should be documented, communicated, and this is the big one, managed. Managed. This process, you need a quality champion. I'm not saying you should hire someone to do it only, but it would be great if someone's job can be spent dedicated to this, at least part-time or something, because what gets watched gets done. If you put this together and just leave it somewhere and never bring it up again and trust that everybody's following it, then it will quickly dissolve into the digital ether. So this needs to be managed. It is almost like a line of business within your group. Quality assurance, it has to be realistic. How you support the standard, that's what quality assurance is. It has to be realistic. I said every class has to be problem-based, but I don't have to say every class has to be problem-based. I can make changes around. I can be realistic and say classes for soft skills need to be problem-based. This is a lot of talk and discussion that you all have to do about what is realistic based on your experience and what's scalable. Change management is essential. This for some of you, this will be a bigger change than others. So you may have to look back at those, how change management works and ensure that you have that plan in place before you just decide everyone's going to follow this. Okay. No, you need to have some sort of change management plan, and it should be consequential. There should be a reason for you not following the process. And if you didn't follow the process, it's got to be consequential. Now, I don't mean punish or write up or anything like that, But say, for example, you have every meeting, you have a quality minute. Everyone has to go around the room and talk about how they implemented the new quality plan in their project. And you sat up there, you have nothing. And we know you're working on a project. So, things like that. Like it needs to matter. And then finally, control. You need to really look at your workflow and the workflow of the people around you to really implement the proper checks. Because if you're not going to reduce the workload of anyone, which I'm sure you aren't, we have to find other ways to accommodate this extra work, right? Standards lead to standardization. I am not a fan of standardization. I do not want my classes to look like everyone else. I do not feel the pressure to do that. I don't want the pressure to do that. However, and I think, and before I used to think of this as an all or nothing, right? It doesn't have to be. There could be, everyone needs to use these types of templates, but how you design it is up to you. It's up, there's ways around, but really at the end of the day, in any quality literature you will read, the first thing they talk about is standardization. That's how you get to consistent quality controls. And it's creepy and we don't like it. However, the closer we can get to that, the easier it will be to track quality. Everyone must know their role and ask not if, but how, right? And then for inspection, make sure there's instructions and roles, expectations, always added to the project plan. Always add quality to the project plan so that people know it's coming and that it's real and that we mean business about it. And this is a big one. Position this as a learning tool, not punitive. It's not, this is not a punishment for us to go through your course. It's not a punishment. Again, here are all the steps under quality management, and I want to stress this. This is not intended to teach instructional design. And I mentioned the woman who wanted to make sure that Bloom, she has a visceral reaction, like a lot of us do, to people using understand in the objectives. So she wanted to build a standard around that idea of using Bloom's taxonomy. But I would argue that you don't use this to teach instructional design. You use it to support instructional design. If people are struggling with instructional design, they're going to struggle with this. How are they going to meet the standard if they don't know how? Problem-based learning is a whole thing, is a whole discipline. And if they don't know how to do that, then either you're going to find a way to teach them that, or you are going to have to change the standard in some way. Right? I mean, you can't hold them to a standard if they don't know how to do it. So you need to support them learning the things baked into the standard. All right, so I'm going to show you a website right quick before we go. And so your next steps would be to complete the reflection exercises that are in this worksheet that I have for you to really think about how you want to approach this. I have an audit sheet, those 5 formalization qualities. I want you to go through and see how close you are to those and what it would take to get to those. And just start thinking about the mission statement you want for yourself or for your organization. And I'll leave you with this. Edward Deming, Edward Deming is one of the many fathers of quality control. And he says this quote, which I think is important because when we use this checklist approach, I think this is what we're trying to do. So 85% of the reasons for failure are deficiencies in the systems and process rather than the employee. The role of management is to change the process rather than badgering individuals to do better. So, absolutely, I can't stress this enough. We're trying to fix people. We should be fixing the process in which these classes are made within, not just the person making the course. All right, so here I have a QR code that goes to a link tree where you can find those quality documents, but this is also the URL as well. Okay, that is what I have for you.
Thank you so much. This session was not only engaging, but so packed full of insights and giving the framework for figuring out that quality management and being able to take like my processes and think about those and relation was so helpful. So thank you so much. If everyone else wants to say thank you in the chat or use the reactions to give a little appreciation, feel free. I posted the link, I quick typed it out in the chat, so feel free to go there. We'll also, so we recorded this session and we're going to create a short micro course. We'll include that link in there too, along with the recording. If you want to go back and see any parts or see the whole thing again, or even share with some coworkers, because I think the beginning of the process and getting people on board with the reason behind quality management is such a big piece of it. The why, the like mission statement that you were talking about. So thanks so much. Lots of amazing comments in the chat. Do you have a minute or two to stay and answer a question or two, or do you need to run?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. If you need to run, we totally understand. We'll do, so at the end of our workshops, we like to be able to unmute quick and say thank you and goodbye if you have to leave. And then if you have a question, post it in the chat. So feel free to unmute and say goodbye and thank you. And I hope you have a wonderful day if you have to head out.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.